How many dogs do you have? Because you've even got like a shed built for dogs, right?
Yeah, we've got a kennel.
Yeah.
How many have we got? I don't know. I think we're up around 16.
Wow, that's so many. That's not including the puppies, right?
So 16 plus the litter.
Wow.
And we're going to keep 2 from that litter.
This production was recorded at the podcast studios in the Media Arts Centre at Murdoch University. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Murdoch University. Any content provided by the hosts and guests are their personal opinions and are not intended to represent the views or opinions of the university, its administration, faculty, or staff. Now we have that out of the way, let's talk science. Paramount importance.
Well, I think we should maybe get on to what
yes, we probably should. We could chat about dogs all day.
Yeah, I'm sure we could do a whole podcast about
probably could.
dogs. Yeah, and you'd be the
slightly off topic.
Yeah, it would be. Well, let's jump from the land into the water. So we're going to talk about seagrass today, and you're an expert globally. You've got some projects all around the world with seagrass, and I've got a lot of questions here that we're going to start pretty broad and then go into some of the more specific topics.
No worries.
Well, let's start with the very broad foundation of what is a seagrass and how is it different to your algae and seaweed?
Okay, so seagrasses are actually flowering plants. So whereas seaweeds are fairly simple in terms of their cell structure and their complexity, seagrasses are literally like flowering plants. So they evolved originally on land and have moved back into the ocean. So they have a lot of the characteristics that you would find in land plants. In terms of comparisons, I would probably compare them to lawn grass, something like couch grass, where you've got runners and seagrasses have rhizomes that grow under the sediment, and then they send up these shoots of leaves, and they actually produce flowers underwater as well. So they undergo their entire life history underwater.
Right. So if they're producing flowers, that means they will pollinate.
Yeah.
And like that. Yeah. So how did that?
Which is an absolute mind twist. How do they actually pollinate their flowers underwater? So they've got to have waterproof pollen first off, which is a big step. And obviously we don't have birds or insects to do the pollination. So the pollen is actually transported by currents. It drifts along, and then the female flowers are adapted so that they have these long stigmas that stick out, long sort of flowering parts that stick out to actually catch the pollen as it drifts past. And so the pollen is often in sticky clouds or in sticky threads, and it'll drift along, and as it gets past the female flower, it gets caught on the stigma.
Right.
And fertilization happens.
Right. How does the pollen, like you said, it has to be waterproof? Is it just like a cellular structure that sort of encases it? Or
so it's basically a cell wall around it that protects them.
Right. And when you said it's like a sticky cloud, is that – so on the boat, sometimes you just see these brown mists.
No, you won't see it.
No, you won't see it?
No, they're really tiny. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So why is seagrass such an important species? What are the different roles that they play in an ecosystem?
Seagrasses are strange because, there's not that many species. There's only about 60, 70 species, depending which taxonomist you talk to on which day. But they cover huge areas, and because of the way they grow, they have this network of rhizomes under the sediment. That means that they're holding the sediment in place. It means that they can grow in unstable sediment areas. So seagrasses grow in sand or mud. Not much else can grow in that sort of area. So if you think about seaweeds, they need something to attach to because they've just got a holdfast that sort of attaches onto the rock. They simply cannot attach to sand or mud unless they've got some sort of root structure, which most don't. Seagrasses can, so they have that network of rhizomes. So that hanging on, they're creating a new habitat in bare sand areas. And if you think about a seagrass meadow, it's got these leaves in WA, the leaves are probably up to 30 to 50 centimetres high. So that's the canopy height. That provides a three-dimensional structure for all sorts of things to live in. So it could be fish, it could be crustaceans. Many of our commercial fish have part of their life history that lives in seagrasses. So important in terms of creating a habitat, but then they hold the sediment in place, and that means that it reduces coastal erosion. So if you didn't have anything holding the sediment there, the sand would wash away and the waves would get closer and closer to the beach and remove the beach. And so I've seen places where they've lost their seagrass for various reasons, often through pollution, but sometimes through storm events. And you see the whole coastline starting to erode really quickly afterwards, after the seagrass is gone. So yeah, really important in that sense.
Right. Wow. That in terms of habitat, like I do a lot of fish projects, and we've just done a few projects with the seagrass fish, and I know a lot of fish have morphological traits where they've all shaped to hide in the seagrass. The importance of seagrass suggesting for juvenile and small fish as well has been huge. So there also is a big benefit, which is carbon storing.
Yeah. So again, the fact that they have these rhizomes means that the products of photosynthesis are stored in those rhizomes, so carbohydrates, sugars, and they use those during winter, for example. So when there's not enough light to photosynthesize, they rely on those stores in their rhizomes. When the seagrasses die, you just get new shoots being produced, and the carbon just stays there. So those old rhizomes just stay underground. And so over time, so for example, if you look at Shark Bay, you've got something like 10 odd meters of sandbanks. That's all created by seagrasses, and they've accumulated sediment over the top of them as they've grown. And underneath all of that are thousands of years of old seagrass rhizomes. So that's a huge amount of carbon that's been stored there, locked away. So as we get extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the seagrasses are capturing it, storing it in the rhizomes, burying it, and locking it away. So they're removing it from the atmosphere, which is really, really useful. Probably most useful in the fact that it's there, as opposed to what they're doing at the moment, because what they're doing from year to year is relatively small. But in the in the grand scheme of things, the amount of rhizome that's already buried is massive. And if that, for whatever reason, gets disturbed, all of that suddenly becomes available. So it's a long-term storage. It's locked away. If we get a disturbance, we potentially release that carbon again. And it's the sort of thing that we're seeing in the Arctic tundra. As we're starting to get defrosting of the tundra, all of that organic material that's buried under there, all those bogs and so on, that's all being released. Huge amounts of carbon going into the atmosphere and methane.
Right. What is the Arctic tundra? Okay, I've just come across this probably on one of the last field trips when I was up north.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't hear about it till then. Came in lectures and it probably went over my head. But
no, I'm a marine biologist, so I don't really talk about the tundra much. But it's grasslands and bogs and so on up around the Arctic areas, so Siberia, northern Europe, northern Russia, and so on. It's a long-standing habitat that is mostly frozen. It's areas where there's a lot of buried peat, so old organic material that's been buried over a long period of time. And then because of the temperatures up there, it's become frozen, and so it's locked away. So again, we've got huge amounts of organic material buried in there. Once that thaws, suddenly all of that becomes available to bacterial decomposition. Carbon dioxide and methane get released into the atmosphere.
Right.
So this is one of the big problems that we've got with a feedback loop, or I guess a reinforcing loop in climate change. As we get climate change warming and melting the tundra, we're starting to get release of more greenhouse gases, and bang, process continues and just gets worse and worse.
Right. Is there any comparisons to like amount of emissions compared to what's carbon stored? Like, is it like relatively the amount of emissions we're putting out the same or less or more to what's getting released through?
We're still producing way too much greenhouse gases. And, that's the first thing that we need to do is reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we're contributing to the atmosphere. It's going to take a while for us for the whole system to settle down again after we stop releasing those gases, because there's so much stored in the atmosphere and there's so much stored in the ocean as well. So carbon dioxide will dissolve in the ocean as well. So we've already pumped way too much greenhouse gas into the environment. It's going to take a while to come back.
Mm. You quickly alluded to it before about saying there's about 50 to 60 species of seagrass. How many species are in, say, WA, and like the different types of them? Because you said they've got the long strand ones, which is, I get Posidonia.
Yep, Posidonia.
But then I know we've got really short ones, and then we've got ones in freshwater environments.
Yeah, and we've got some with woody stems there's a variety.
Stems?
Yeah, woody stems as well. Yeah.
Are they in WA?
Yeah.
Wait, which ones?
Amphibolus.
Oh, right. So that's cool.
That's a woody stem.
It's just a really thin.
It's a thin woody stem.
Yeah,
but
so I was more thinking like a shrub or a tree. But
they are a little bit, but because the water's supporting them, they don't need to be really woody.
Yeah, of course. Why do we have different species in, like, say, different environments? Well, I guess we can talk from freshwater to hypersaline, but like I know in, say, Coburn Sound, you got different species just within that small area.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the same as anything. You've got a mixture of species around. They adapt to different conditions. Some are opportunists. So as conditions come right, they will grow from seed and grow very quickly, but they'll also die off during winter. So our paddleweed, the Halophila, is one of those. It produces seeds. They fall into the sediment, produces a seed bank. They die off during winter, and then in spring they grow from seed and replenish the population. So those are opportunists. There are quite a few seagrass species that fall into that category, have a seed bank and will bounce back each year. And then we have the sort of the later successional species, so things like Posidonias, Amphibolus. In the tropics, we've got things like Inhalus and Cymodosia, those sorts of things. So they produce fruits that don't form a seed, a dormant seed. They produce fruits that just keep growing. And so they will drift along on the currents, settle out somewhere and start growing. And they're there, all year round perennials. So,
right.
Yeah.
And then we do have, like, what are the limitations? Because we have ones in freshwater, and I found some in, like, hypersaline parts of, I think it was like, I think the seed must have survived in like 120 parts per thousand, and then we saw it started growing. Rupia,
wow.
Rupia, and then I saw the plant in, I think it was 60 parts per thousand.
Yeah. So Rupia will generally find in estuaries, so they're well adapted to changes in salinity. We don't really find them in the ocean. So in terms of seagrasses, there are true marine seagrasses. Then there's a bunch of estuarine type ones, so Rupia. Some of the seagrasses like Zostra and Halophila will also grow in a variety of different salinities. But most of the true seagrasses will grow only in seawater, and they don't have a huge salinity tolerance, most of them. Mostly they will survive between probably, 15 and say 40 parts per thousand. So they won't really go much outside that. There are some exceptions. Rupia is sort of there. Halophila is quite flexible. It'll tolerate quite a variety of conditions, and you'll also find it growing intertidally. So it can deal with certain amount of exposure and so on, particularly in humid conditions. So, obviously they're quite small. They'll dry out and crisp up and then they're gone.
Yep.
But in Shark Bay, we've got extremes of salinity. And so things like Amphibolus and Posidonia australis will grow in Shark Bay under really quite high salinities. Amphibolus in particular, you will find growing in salinities up to 60 parts per thousand. So quite a lot more than normal seawater. That's probably about the limit. Any more than that, and I think they start struggling with the physiology and the survival of the new growth, the young cells that haven't had a chance to toughen up.
Right, yeah.
And probably through reproduction as well. There's limits on salinity tolerance in that flowering stage.
What about light limitation? How deep can we find seagrass?
amazingly, you'll find some that are down around 100 meters.
Whoa.
In stupidly clear water in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, it's so that what they call the mesophotic zone.
Yeah.
Or even less? Or?
Just about. There's actually a fair amount of light down there because the water is so clear. So in the eastern Mediterranean, that sort of area is so very, very clear, almost no runoff. Just
is that why it's so clear, because there's no runoff?
Yeah, I think so, mainly.
Oh, okay.
Would be interesting to know what it was like when it was forested.
Yeah,
before it dried out. But yeah, we have seagrasses growing down to 40-something meters in WA. So down around Geograph Bay, some of the offshore areas where, again, it's really clear. We've got records of Posidonia growing down to 42 meters, I think. In the northern Great Barrier Reef, there are some deep water seagrasses that I think grow down to 60 meters as well.
Right.
Again, really clear.
Yeah. 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 That's like a plant that, relies on photosynthesis. That's a long way down. Like I know a lot of people don't quite understand. Well, unless you've been in that depth of water, like it's quite dark.
Yeah, well, if you think about diving limits, even as an advanced diver, you're not supposed to go deeper than 30 meters. Yeah. So these seagrasses are growing deeper than we can dive recreationally.
Yeah.
And anybody who's dived down to that depth, 30 meters, you're starting to just notice it. It's starting to get darker down there.
Oh, definitely.
These seagrasses are able to tolerate that.
Especially in, like, say, wintertime when the water gets a lot stirred up and I guess light isn't penetrating as few. How long, like, can they survive without the light kind of like?
Yeah, so this is where the rhizomes come in. Right. So they photosynthesize a lot during summer, obviously, far more light than they need. They store the products of photosynthesis in their rhizomes. And then during winter, when the light cuts down, they rely on those rhizomes to just keep ticking over. So that's how they survive under deeper conditions than they could photosynthesize in during winter.
Yeah.
Again, that's something that they can do that seaweeds can't, for example. So seaweeds don't really have a way of storing products of photosynthesis throughout a yearly cycle. So the seagrasses have that long-term advantage. They can survive year by year.
Right.
Relying on their rhizomes.
Does all algae or seaweeds rely on photosynthesis, or do they have like a?
Yeah, they all rely on photosynthesis as well.
Ah.
The difference with the seaweeds is that they have different pigments. So some of those pigments allow them to get extra light from different wavelengths at deeper waters.
Yeah.
So seagrasses, being flowering plants, originally terrestrial, have chlorophyll A and B. So that's why they're green, and they can only absorb those lights, those wavelengths. For example, red algae or brown algae have accessory pigments that allow them to capture more of the light spectrum. And so that allows them under certain circumstances to grow in deeper waters as well.
Yeah. That is, I remember learning that in your class, and that was like mind blowing. And it makes sense when you explain it, but like it's just not something I remember it wasn't something I quite was thinking about till it was explained to me. How are seagrasses affected by climate change? What like temperature rise is needed have a negative impact, or what are the other elements from climate change that are affecting seagrasses?
Yeah, so there's obviously lots of different angles to climate change, lots of different impacts on the environment. The obvious one is increased temperature. Seagrasses do have, like any plant or animal, they have temperature limits, that they have optimum temperatures that they grow in. Seagrasses, it looks like their physiological temperature preferences go up to probably about 30 degrees Celsius. So, in terms of coastal waters here, we're not there yet. But places like, the central and coral coast, going up to Ningaloo and so on, during these heat waves, we're getting over 30 degrees. And so some of the seagrasses are starting to struggle in those sorts of places. In terms of cold, some species in Alaska, the main problem with losing seagrasses up there is ice erosion. So they've got sea ice that's grinding away at the shoreline and grinding up the seagrass, and they're growing perfectly happy apart from the ice scaring them away.
Right.
Yeah. So they do have reasonable temperature tolerances. They become more productive as temperature increases. And so the optimum temperature, as I said, for Posidonia is probably around about 30 degrees, 28 to 30 degrees. We're not quite there yet, but as we get more of these heat waves, and I'm expecting them to occur more frequently.
Why is that?
Just because the underlying water temperature is slowly getting warmer, and when we get a La Nina that's pumping that hot equatorial water through, it just provides this spike on top of the already raised temperature. And I think what we're looking at down the track is more frequent heat waves. Every time we get a La Nina, we're going to get a marine heat wave flowing down the coast.
How are our seagrasses looking in WA and then globally?
They're doing okay. So as I said, they haven't quite reached their temperature threshold yet. And of course, we do have tropical seagrasses as well. And so they are adapted to warmer conditions anyway. What we are starting to see is probably a contraction of some of the colder water species towards the southern part of the state. So we have Amphibolus and Posidonia that occur all the way up to Ningaloo. I suspect we're starting to see a move south of those colder water species. We've lost, I monitored the loss of a 10 hectare patch of seagrass during the previous heat wave, so the 2011 heat wave, and they haven't come back. We saw the impact on the seagrasses in Shark Bay. They're struggling to return. And I think this is all part of the underlying increase in temperatures, and they're sort of just being edged out of their comfort zone.
Yeah, we're seeing that with fish, like the tropicalisation as well. But are you getting re-establishment of more tropical species come down as well? Or like that 10 hectare patch, really was it just like bare sand now?
I haven't really seen it in the seagrasses. We've always had a few tropical species come down our coast all the way down to Geograph Bay. We've got things like Syringodium, which is a tropical species, and some of the Halophilus species come a long way down. That's because of the Lewin Current. So, every year we have the Lewin Current that's bringing tropical species down and keeping the waters warmer than you would expect for the west coast of a continent. So we've always had the tropical species. So it's difficult to tell if we've had an expansion of tropical species into the colder waters. I'm not sure that anybody's done any significant surveys along those lines. I would be looking for some of the other tropical species, things like Cymodosia, starting to move their way further south. So they occur in the northern part of Ningaloo. We haven't seen them in the south. That's where I would next start to expect to see them.
So that,
haven't seen
10
it
hectare
yet,
patch,
but I haven't had a really good look yet.
Yeah. So that 10 hectare patch, nothing re-established in that area?
No. So that was a sandbar. It got hit by a double whammy. So it copped a cyclone that resuspended all the sediment and buried them. And then they were just starting to recover, and then we had the heat wave and it just wiped them out.
Right.
And they haven't come back. Yeah.
So that would be a huge loss of like habitat and everything. Then like, I guess, as you said, the stabilisation of sand as well, that means you're going to start seeing shifting of sand.
Yeah, well, this is a big sandbar that sort of reaches out from the coast, probably 2 kilometres out from the coast into the lagoon. It was being stabilised by the seagrass. I'm expecting it to sort of start wiggling around a lot more in future.
Yeah. I want to
I haven't monitored any of that, so I don't know.
Okay. I'll get to restoration in a little bit, but what are some of the most impacting factors on seagrass? So you've alluded to like climate change, pollution, like what I'm guessing there's scouring from like also boats and dugongs. I know that's it's an interesting one where there's an actually the way they feed's quite destructive, but it's not. Yeah,
it is quite destructive, but they tend to prefer to feed on opportunistic species, so these short-lived ones. And so they're grinding through them and they're ripping up all the roots and everything. But what they're actually doing is they're resuspending the sediment as part of the feeding process. So they're bringing that seed bank up to the surface, so encouraging the seeds to be released. And they're also bringing nutrients that might be buried in the soil up to the surface.
It's like ploughing a field.
So they're like ploughing a field, and as the nutrients are being brought up, the bacteria can start mineralizing them, making them available for the next generation. Of course, they're also pooping in there, so there's a little extra boost of nitrogen going straight in there as well. There's some interesting work that's been done. I'd like to do a bit more looking at what impact the dugongs have on seed banks, and that whole recycling process, that natural recycling process. They do eat seagrasses, and they are, as you said, quite destructive. But I don't think they're having a long-term impact. Turtles, on the other hand, can be a problem.
Really?
Yeah. So interestingly, the turtles that we have at Ningaloo and, I guess most of WA will feed both on seagrasses and on seaweeds. In the tropics, they seem to prefer seagrasses. So they will eat mostly seagrass and less seaweeds. Now, what we've seen in a few places is that turtles have become protected. And because of various other disturbances, the seagrass meadows aren't quite as flourishing as they have been. And so as the numbers of turtles increase, suddenly we're seeing problems with turtles overgrazing the seagrass meadows. And so they're eating up their own food supply and, causing some real problems.
Right. I actually have a friend doing her PhD in the Cocos Islands on exactly.
Cocos Islands, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Cocos Islands lost a huge area of seagrass when they dredged for the new harbour development. So that there's a new port that they put in. And a lot of sediment was resuspended and seems to have probably shaded out a lot of the seagrass there, and it hasn't come back. The little bits that have come back, the turtles, and there's a lot of turtles out there, the turtles have come in and absolutely hammered. And so we're rather concerned about the long-term viability of the seagrass populations there. And so there's work being done by Tropwater, James Cook University, looking at ways of preventing turtles from wiping out the seagrass before it has a chance to get going. Yeah.
I had no idea about the turtles.
Yeah. It's a funny one because turtles have been harvested, particularly in developing countries, but, we had a turtle cannery at Ningaloo back in
really? You said cannery?
Yeah.
They used to put turtles in cans?
Yeah, turtle meat.
What?
Yeah, you need to look this up. Turtles were harvested big time. So the turtle populations are getting better up at Ningaloo, but they were seriously fished out. I think the cannery finished probably in the 60s.
Oh, that's not even that long ago.
No, I know.
Crazy, that's the first time I'm hearing of this.
Yeah. Turtles are very much affected.
What about the other like issues like I know boat anchors and scouring moorings and pollution? Like what are the main contributors to seagrass loss?
So the probably the number one global cause of seagrass loss is nutrient enrichment. So too many nutrients coming in from either agriculture, sewage, deforestation, all those sorts of things where you get nutrients or topsoil being washed into the ocean and blanketing the seagrass, so absolutely smothering it, but also introducing loads of nutrients. And if you've got a coastal lagoon, so any of the coral reef type areas, but also areas that are bays that have islands sort of protecting them from getting regularly flushed, you'll get a buildup of nutrients, and then the seaweeds overgrow the seagrasses. So the seaweeds can absorb nutrients far more quickly than seagrasses, and so they outcompete them, completely smother them. And that's exactly what happened in Coburn Sound.
Right. Well, are you talking about epiphytes?
Yeah, epiphytes.
Yeah. So epiphytes is an algae that grows on top of the seagrass.
That's right. Epiphytes are epi just means on, phyte means plant, so they're growing on the plant. So we have terrestrial epiphytes in the jungles, things like orchids and whatever that grow in the tops of the canopies. Same sort of thing happens with seagrasses, but they're seaweeds that grow on the surface of the seagrass.
Right.
And they can block out the light and literally smother the seagrass.
Right. You quickly alluded to happened in Keulen Sound.
Yes, happened in Keulen Sound. So we had, the industrial buildup started in early 50s. We had an oil refinery that was pumping waste straight out into Keulen Sound. We had a nitrogen fertilizer factory, CSBP, and quinine nitrogen.
Even abattoirs.
There was so much nitrogenous waste pumped into Keulen Sound that ships were running aground on the mound of waste.
Really?
So yeah,
wow.
Huge amounts of nutrients being pumped in. And so the whole system, the seagrasses were lost because of epiphyte overgrowth, and also there was so much nutrient that we went from a benthic, so seabed-based productive environment, so seagrasses, to a plankton-dominated system. So we had plankton blooms several times a year and literally, clouded out the entire water column so that there was no chance of anything growing on the bottom. And so, Keulen Sound ended up being quite a cesspit.
Yeah, and
really
it was like
horrible.
it's like 80% loss or something crazy.
Yeah, 80% of the seagrass in Keulen Sound was lost.
And it hasn't really come back, has it?
No. So we got to the point where we've managed to clean up all the industry. So there's very little pollution into Keulen Sound now. It's really a very clean habitat. And we've done transplant experiments where we tried planting seagrass back into the areas where it had been lost. And
so this is the restoration.
Yeah, this is as a prelude to restoration, just to see if it was possible. And they grow quite happily in those areas where it was lost. The problem is that we've lost a lot of the sediment that was on top of those banks, particularly along that Quinana strip. The shallow bank that goes out a couple of Ks used to be covered in sand. Seagrass would grow in there. A lot of that sand has now become destabilized, gone into the deeper basin. And so we're left with the seabed, which is sort of more clayey than sandy. And so it's very difficult for the seagrass to actually become established in there. Yeah.
Okay. So would it be like the topsoil as well, being nutrient like topsoil in terrestrial environments, or that?
Yeah,
not quite the same?
I mean seagrasses tend to get their nutrients mostly from the water column.
Okay.
They will get a little bit from the sediment as well, but not so much. So nutrients in the sediment aren't necessarily that much of a problem, but the sediment structure itself isn't there.
Yeah.
And so
that's where the seagrass hold the stabilization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, we've lost the seagrass, we've lost the sediment.
Right. So what are the different techniques of restoration then?
So we've tried all sorts of different things. I mean, and this is a global effort. Everybody's been trying. There's been a lot of really good work done in the US because they've lost a lot of seagrasses because most of their seagrass grows in sheltered bays and in estuaries. So they have been very successful because they're fairly sheltered waters. Once they clean up the pollution, they're able to re-establish the seagrass. In WA, it's a bit more difficult because our seagrasses actually grow in the open ocean. So they're exposed to swells, big waves and all that sort of thing. So we have a few more challenges than many other parts of the world. In terms of ways of restoring seagrass, you can use different parts of the life history. So the most obvious one is to use seeds. And so those seagrasses that produce dormant seeds, so things like Helophylla, the Zosteras, and all of those ones that produce these seeds that form a seed bank, you can actually harvest those seeds, store them, and
how do you harvest them?
That they produce the seeds on a specialized little branch, and so you can actually capture those and
by hand.
By hand, yep.
That's a big effort though to do if you're trying to restore a large area. Right?
Yeah, although each branch will produce hundreds of seeds, so you're actually getting a reasonable amount of material, and you can just cut off the branches and often they will actually break off by themselves, float for a while, and then release the seeds naturally. So if you can capture those, then you store them, allow the seeds to fall out, protect them until it's growing season, and then just throw them wherever you want. So that's worked really well, and particularly in the northern US, they have really one species that dominates most of their estuaries, Zostera marina, and that happens to be one of those ones that produces seeds that form a seed bank. It produces these branches that have hundreds of seeds on them. Very easy to collect lots of material and to restore big areas literally by going out in a boat and throwing the seeds out the back of the boat.
Oh, right.
And that's worked extremely well. And they've restored thousands of hectares of, for example, Chesapeake Bay, one of their really big estuaries that lost huge amounts of seagrass. They managed to restore that really successfully.
That's
using that method.
What about here?
Not so easy here.
Yeah.
So here, we don't have many species that produce a seed bank. Most of our important seagrass species, our meadow-forming species, produce fruits that continue growing.
What do these fruits look like? Actually, I think I know what they look like. But
yeah, so they're little beans almost.
You see them wash up a lot.
Yeah, you see them wash up. Probably October, November.
Yeah,
you start to see them wash up. And yeah, they're in little pods. The pods float for a while. They split open, and then the seedling drops out and just keeps growing. So there is no dormant stage. There's no seed bank, and so we're stuck with this is when they produce them. They have to keep growing. We can't just store them somewhere in bags and then chuck them out the back of a boat later on. So we're a bit tied up in terms of times that we can do this. So we're stuck with a few months over summer to actually get this going. So yes, we can use seedlings, and so the Seeds for Snapper program does exactly that. It catches the fruits that are being produced by Posidonia. It allows the pods to split open, collects the seedlings, and then straight away takes them out and puts them in areas that we want seagrass to grow. And that's starting to show some really good signs of success.
Right, whereabouts?
In areas off, I guess, south of Jervois Bay, down to, I don't know, along the Kwinana Shelf, basically. So those areas that we've lost.
all inside Coburn.
Yeah, inside Coburn. Those areas that we've lost huge amounts of seagrass and that really urgently need replanting. So that works really well. Obviously works for some species, but not for all of them. And it doesn't work well in areas that are exposed to wave action. So if there's a little bit more wave action, we need to think about other ways of doing it. And so when we're thinking about that, we need to think about transplanting existing seagrass material. So if you think about what we're doing in Coburn Sound, there's a lot of dredging that's going on. Things like shipping channels and so on are being created. Construction work, there's a lot of seagrass that's being destroyed, for example, for the Westport Harbour. What we're looking at is salvaging that seagrass, so getting that before it gets dredged away, and literally transplanting it somewhere else. And the way in which we do that is using what's called sprigs. So we're looking at a piece of seagrass rhizome, probably about that long, with a couple of shoots on it. So that's probably about 15 to 20 centimetres long. A couple of leafy shoots on it, roots hanging down from it. That's ready to transplant. And so we collect that from the area that we're salvaging, and then we take it to wherever we want to plant it and dig a little furrow and pin it down into the seabed and then let it grow. That works really well. We've transplanted 3 hectares of seagrass down the bottom end of Coburn Sound doing that. They're going great guns.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. It's a lot of manual
It's labor. A lot of manual labor, yeah. And I think there's no way of dealing with the scale of loss that we've had without getting citizen science involved, getting volunteers to come in and help. If we tried to do this commercially using commercial divers, nobody would touch it because it was way too expensive. It's just not economically viable to do it. we've been able to use volunteers. Seeds for Snapper is a huge citizen science volunteer program. There are loads of people who want to get involved, and so I don't think that's necessarily a problem.
Oh, great.
But we need to rely on that, and it's important to recognise that we are relying on citizen scientists, on the general public to give us a hand restoring these areas. We can't do it on our own.
I remember going back a few years, you showed it's like a machine, like a very expensive machine that did something.
Very expensive machine.
It was like $2 million if I remember.
Yeah, about 2 million.
Yeah. And it didn't work, or it did work?
It did work. It did work. So that was the EcoSub, which was a machine, basically an underwater bulldozer. So it would plough into a seagrass meadow and literally cut a block, maybe just over half a square metre of seagrass, down to a depth of maybe 35, 40 centimetres deep. So it has all of the rhizomes, all of the roots, all of the surrounding sediment, literally cuts a block of seabed with seagrass in it, and then lifts that up and can transport it to somewhere else and plant it. And we did a survey year before last to look back at some of those areas that have been transplanted 20 odd years ago, and you can still see them, that they have survived. There's been other seagrass that have come in and settled around them, because once you start planting seagrass, you get seedlings settling in amongst it. Yeah.
How quickly
survived really well.
How quickly can they spread out? I guess it's different in different areas.
Yeah, it is, and this works. And we've done it in really high energy areas, which is what this is suited for. You're transplanting a huge, heavy block. These things were up to 350 kilos, so they're really big, heavy blocks of sediment. So they're not going to wash away.
Yeah.
We probably moved them for the work that we did, which was really just a pilot. We never took it any further because it's expensive. We probably transferred them maybe a kilometre, maybe 2.
Okay, yeah.
So, there were 2 machines, one to dig them up, one to plant them, and then there was a series of shuttles that could transfer them between the machines.
Underwater or above the water?
So they'd be towed by a boat and they would stay underwater.
Right, okay. So going back to, I quickly jumped off, but how quickly can they spread out?
It depends on the method. So these blocks, yes, they did spread out from their blocks, but it was quite slow. And I think part of the problem is that you're digging from the middle of a seagrass meadow rather than the edges. And at the edges, you've got sort of more of a sideways growth, so they're in this sort of expansion mode on the edges of the meadow. And if you think about the edge of a lawn, you'll find these runners growing out into the bare sand areas. Same thing happens with the seagrass, and they grow really quickly on those edges because there's loads of light, there's loads of area for them to grow into, there's no other roots or rhizomes to contend with, and so they grow really quickly in those areas. What we were harvesting was from the middle of the meadow, and it's like taking a block out of the middle of your lawn. It's not in that rapid growth phase, and so they're not necessarily spreading as quickly. So what we're finding in terms of rapid growth, the best results we're getting is with that sprig method. So we're cutting from the edge of the meadow, we're planting them, and they are in that expansion mode, and so they grow really quickly and colonize much more quickly than those blocks.
Is that the sort of new best way for restoration?
Yeah. And you know, we can cover a larger area without having to deal with the machinery. We can't do that sprig method in really high energy areas.
Because it's just too much water.
It's just too much, and the transplants will just wash away. Those blocks, on the other hand, we planted into the, Success Bank, which is, huge waves off the coast of Fremantle, massive waves that come in. We had massive storms that came through 3-4 meter swells and all that sort of stuff. No problem.
Right.
The sprig method probably wouldn't work under those conditions, but it seems to work better in things that are marginally less traumatic for the seagrasses.
Yeah. Is a seagrass like all one plant, or is it made of multiple plants? Because I know I read in Shark Bay, it's the biggest plant in the world, which
Yes.
and it's they covered God, now I've forgotten the size, but a huge area.
Yeah, I think the length of it was something like 180 kilometers.
Whoa.
Yeah. So absolutely massive, you know, and just covered this huge area. The way in which seagrasses grow. So if you start off with a seedling, it'll grow some shoots and it'll start producing these rhizomes. Each of those rhizomes is still part of that original plant. And they're basically underground stems. And so it's standing these stems out sideways. Every so often, it'll produce a new leafy shoot. Each of those leafy shoots is a clone of the original seedling. And so over time, as it spreads its rhizomes far and wide, it just produces new shoots. That produces new vigor in that part. That'll produce new rhizomes, but it's all genetically the same as the original seedling. So, and that's how you get these absolutely huge plants. They've got similar sorts of things in the Mediterranean. I think not quite as big, but, you know, thousands of years old.
Right.
And absolutely amazing. And it's because of this clonal growth. It's
so they just
genetically the
same. They also
same.
just don't die.
They just don't die.
Right.
So the leaves will die. So the leaves have a lifespan of maybe, for Posidonias, probably about 3 months.
But wouldn't pollination be different species, like different?
That gives you the opportunity for new genetic diversity. But, you know, if you've got a small bay, a seedling happens to get in there, it's the only seedling there, chances of getting pollinated might be reduced.
So what's happening? Is there not different like plants in Shark Bay, or what's?
There are.
There are.
It's just this one area that they noticed was genetically identical. So it's literally one big plant.
Does that say it's also like
area.
Connected? It's like this one plant's connected. Yeah, right.
Well, the rhizomes can actually break down because it's produced a new shoot. It's getting its own photosynthesis, its own new growth happening. So it takes off from there. So you can get cases where the rhizomes will break down, and
so it might not
that connection
be like
gets broken.
Physically connected.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
so instead of like one, it's saying it's one plant. It's just like it's an army of clones.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I suspect a lot of it probably still is connected because it's fairly low wave energy there.
Yeah.
But yeah, theoretically it could all break down but still be genetically identical, and then you get an army of clones.
Yeah. Right. That's crazy. How important is it to have genetic diversity in seagrass?
We don't know.
Yeah. That's
is the short answer.
Yeah.
They're
obviously quite successful by cloning.
Yeah. That works really well for them. And obviously we do want to have genetic diversity because that gives them the ability to withstand changes in conditions. So they adapt to new conditions by having that genetic diversity. And that whole process of natural selection is really the result of sexual reproduction. The only way in which you can get that diversity and that resilience is by having the genetic diversity, through sexual reproduction. So we don't really know how that works. We know that they do reproduce sexually quite successfully in WA, but in the Mediterranean, some of the plants have been found to not reproduce sexually very often, or certainly not very successfully, which leads to the question of what's going to happen, once the extremes of climate change start kicking in. Are they limited in how well they can adapt to those new conditions? That's where we need that genetic diversity, and we're heading into uncharted territory. And really, being seagrasses, there's not a huge amount of funding for them. So, probably the amount of work that's required hasn't been done quite yet.
Right. Well, hopefully
there's more to be done. Yep.
Yeah. Hopefully in the future it does.
Yeah.
And Geograph Bay, that's also quite a significant. I remember learning that why is like Geograph Bay and Shark Bay such significant areas globally, I guess.
Yeah. If you think about the geomorphology of the area, they're both fairly protected. So Shark Bay is protected because of the peninsulas and because of the islands along the mouth of Shark Bay. That protects it from the worst of the swells. And so it's an ideal place for seagrasses to grow. It's shallow, lots of light, warm, perfect growing conditions. So they do really well. Geograph Bay is the same thing. It's got the capes that are protecting certainly the southern end of Geograph Bay from the majority of the southern swells that come up from the southwest. So again, it's perfect growing conditions. It's shallow, lots of light, clear waters, lots of seagrass, and not really much disturbance. There's a little bit of runoff close to the coast, but really not enough to really cause them problems.
Are these some of the biggest meadows in the world?
Yeah, they are some of the biggest meadows in the world. I don't know if they've been overtaken now. I think there are some in Indonesia that are probably, up there as well.
Right, okay.
One of the big problems is that we haven't done enough survey work of seagrasses. And the problem is that in many coastal areas, particularly in developing countries, you get lots of runoff, lots of cloud cover, makes it very difficult to do the mapping that's required. And of course, you need to be on the ground to, verify your aerial imagery and all that sort of stuff as well. So, yeah.
How do you monitor seagrass health? Like, how can you tell if a plant's healthy or not healthy?
There's a number of different things that we measure. So if we're going back to monitoring a seagrass meadow every year, we would probably monitor things like number of shoots per square metre. That gives us an idea of how healthy the meadow is. If it's thriving, it's going to have a nice high shoot count. One of the first things that happens if a seagrass meadow is dying off is the density of the seagrass starts to decline. So, for example, if we have pollution, nutrients or whatever, we start getting the light levels dropping, and that means that the seagrasses are under stress. They start to thin out, and they thin out because they don't get enough light if they're really tightly packed. And so in lower light conditions, even in deeper waters, you'll start to see them growing more sparsely. And that means that the canopy is more open, and so more light can get in, and the whole part of the leaf can be exposed to light.
Right. And you see in wintertime they die off. It's not the rhizomes, it's just like the leaves? The
leaves, yeah. So, and again, the same sort of thing happens in winter. During winter, you've got less light, obviously. And once the first storms kick in, all of the old summer growth gets washed out. And so you end up with a much thinner canopy. And that means that you've got lots more light coming through, and that's enough to sustain the seagrass during winter.
Right. I think that also relates to why snapper come into definitely Geograph Bay and Keulen during for feed. They definitely snapper go on the bite, let's say, during winter time is because everything gets stirred up less. Like the fish have less habitat to hide in.
Yep.
Easier for them to hunt and forage, especially during the storms. Everything gets.
Yeah, I hadn't realised that, but that makes an awful lot of sense because the canopy is a lot sparser at that stage.
Yeah. You see a lot of seagrass wash up on the beach. Yep. Is that that's normal. Detritus? Yeah. It's normal. Is it healthy? Is it good for the beach? Does that increase the accretion rate?
If you want to lie on the beach and sunbathe, probably not.
Yeah.
But really, it's after the first few storms. You get all of this old stuff, and it's dead leaves, it's epiphytes, it's weaker, older parts of the plants. All of that stuff gets ripped out by the first swells that come through, and it piles it up on the beach where it gets broken down. And so you get all sorts of crustaceans breaking it down. Obviously, it's exposed to sunlight, so it starts to fragment and all that sort of stuff. And then the bacteria get going on it as well. And so all of those nutrients are recycled. If you think about the Perth coastline, we really have almost a coastal lagoon. We've got a series of islands and reefs that are protecting the coastline a few kilometres offshore. It means that we've got a fairly enclosed sort of lagoon. So it's important to keep the nutrients within the lagoon because normally our waters are fairly nutrient poor. If we lose all of those nutrients from the dead seagrass material, suddenly the next generation of seagrasses don't have any nutrients to kick them off. So it's important to have that detritus that washes up on the beach, allow it to recycle. It'll eventually break down and go back into the water column, and then the next generation can use those nutrients to grow again. One of the problems that we face is councils literally bulldozing all of that stuff and putting it into landfills. And once you do that, you're removing huge amounts of nutrients.
Is there been work to stop that?
Not directly, but I think there's enough understanding now that we try to keep the beaches as natural as possible.
Okay, yeah.
Unless it's your number one prime sunbathing beach.
Yeah.
They will still clear their beaches. So Cottesloe, for example, they'll clear their beaches fairly regularly.
It's a bit of a shame. Maybe people that are hopefully listen to this might be like more aware of it now. Let's keep this detritus. I'm not too confident about that. No.
The people who lie on the beaches probably aren't listening to this podcast.
No.
But it's important to recognise that it is part of the system. Those nutrients, all of that material gets broken down and gets re-released, and it's very much a confined loop within that coastal lagoon area.
Does it keep like the sand accretion on the beach as well? I remember I think I was like talking to friends and like we're just thinking that, it also holds the sand there, or is it?
Yes and no. I mean, it'll break down over time, so you lose. There's no long-term stabilising effect on the sediment. It may make a difference during winter where you've got more waves breaking on the beach. It might be enough to sort of gentle that out a bit. But in many cases, it'll break down before the next summer.
Right.
And so, you'd lose that long-term stabilising effect. Yeah.
Okay. When the seagrass breaks down, you see in summertime a lot of these brown balls, which you actually have brought in.
I have brought a little prop with me.
You have, yes.
One of these little guys.
So I'm just going to describe it for the people listening. It's like when you walk on the beach, you see those fur balls, kind of like a cat fur ball.
Yeah.
It's brown, it's stringy. What is it?
It looks a little bit like a turd, given my affiliation with dogs. I'm seeing some similarities here. Basically, it's made up of the fibers of seagrass leaves. So seagrasses have a lot of cellulose fibers inside them, which gives them a lot of strength. It allows them to be flexible and move with wave action and so on, and just gives them a lot of structural strength. Cellulose doesn't break down easily. There's only particular bacteria that'll break it down. So while a lot of the seagrass leaf will be broken down very quickly, a lot of these fibers are left over.
Can you see the fibers in a healthy leaf?
If you hold it up to the light, you can sort of see a few lines through it. In some of the tropical seagrasses, you can actually peel the fibers off.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can see on the edge of the leaf the fibers are starting to peel off, which is very cool. But basically, seagrasses are filled with these cellulose fibers. Gives them a lot of strength, but it's left over after the leaves break down, and so these aren't recycled as quickly, and you'll often find them sort of rolling around and just tying themselves up into these little balls. Sometimes they'll be really round. Sometimes they'll be sort of more turd shaped.
Yeah.
And you'll also find sometimes in big amphibolous meadows, you'll find the amphibolous stems. So they have these little woody stems that are a few millimeters across. They will sometimes form these balls as well, because the stems are actually made up of loads of these fibers as well. And so they don't break down very quickly. You'll find bigger balls made up of coarser fibers, which are actually the amphibolous stems.
Right. Wow.
So this is a Posidonia one.
Yeah.
But you'll also get them from amphibolous.
Yeah.
And somewhat chunkier.
Awesome. I remember when I first growing up as a kid, we used to just throw them at each other because and they're light, they don't hurt too much, and they were a lot of fun. But we had no idea where they come from. Yeah. And I remember learning about it was oh wow, awesome. Yeah. So cool. I know you got a lot of projects around the world, so you do a lot of traveling. You're
not as much as I'd like anymore.
No, but anymore, you still do a lot. Well, not it's got less now with the new role. Yeah. But you've got projects in Raja Ampat. Yeah. Actually, I'm not even going to attempt to list them all, but you've got the Coral Bay Station as well up north, and also your main role here as well. But whereabouts have you? Well, where were you working?
Where have I been working? So Indonesia. So I've been working in Bali. Literally was at a beach resort in Bali and swam off the beach and saw these amazing seagrass meadows. And I thought, I've got to study these.
Yeah.
Give me an excuse to come back to Bali.
Yeah.
So I'm working with one of the universities there.
That's been going for a long time.
That's been going for since 2017. So
Right, okay, yeah.
fair while. And yeah, we're just doing basic surveys because really there's been very little done on seagrass distribution and health in most developing countries, but certainly Indonesia. And with so many islands and such a big coastline, they have a massive seagrass coverage. So it's, at a global scale, it's really important to understand the distribution of the seagrasses, the health of it, how much seagrass there is. If we're doing global carbon budgets and trying to think about carbon sequestration and trying to model what happens to all this carbon dioxide, we need to know how much seagrass is out there and what that's contributing. So yeah, doing those sorts of surveys is really, really important. In addition to Indonesia, so Bali and Raja Ampat, and I'm starting to play around in the northern part of Bali as well. So most of my work so far has been in the south, but starting to play in the north as well. I'd love to do some work in other places. So I had a student who was working in Ambon, so an Indonesian PhD student who was working in Ambon doing seagrass restoration there. So again, different parts of Indonesia. I've been consulted for seagrass work in Singapore as well. So they have some seagrasses there, not a huge amount, but they certainly have some significant populations.
Is that because of their shipping?
Yeah. So shipping and land reclamation. Singapore's a very small place. They're trying to expand it all the time. So land reclamation is probably one of their biggest problems.
Can you explain land reclamation? So that's literally making islands.
Making islands, yeah, exactly. So what we're going to do with Westport actually is create an island. And but in Singapore, because they've got a confined area, they've got a big population, they want to expand, they're literally linking up some of the islands and filling in.
Right, that's going to change the hydrology and everything.
Yeah.
Right, wow. Because that's like the trading hub of the world, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So
pretty much everything.
It's probably the biggest harbour in the Southern Hemisphere, I would think.
Yeah.
And yeah, hugely important crossroads for trade and any sort of travel. So yeah, really important for them to maintain their area. But part of that is land reclamation. They're expanding their island, making it a bit bigger.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
Other work has been in the Maldives, which has been very exciting. I was invited actually by a former Murdoch student who became the chief marine biologist at a very forward-thinking resort in the Maldives, in the southern part of the Maldives, the Six Senses Resort at Lamu Atoll in the southern part. And they have a team of marine biologists. I think they have 10 marine biologists and a very active local recruitment program, but also internships and all that sort of stuff.
For a resort.
Yeah. So they've put huge amounts of money into developing a lab, research profiles, all that sort of stuff.
Can you, as like a tourist,
amazing.
Can you be a tourist and go to this resort?
Yeah. So they're marine biologists, obviously, like all resorts, they're marine biologists, take people diving and swimming and so on. But it allows their visitors to actually see some of the work that's going on, get involved in some of the monitoring, take part in education programs, all that sort of stuff. Absolutely amazing program.
Yeah, that is incredible.
Yeah.
Citizen science to the top.
Yeah, well, exactly. So they hosted a few of us. So there are a couple of friends from James Cook University that I work with, and I went over as well, and we set up a monitoring program for their seagrasses. So they've been doing remote sensing using drones, mapping their island, and monitoring the changes in seagrass dynamics over time. The Maldives is a bit problematic for seagrasses in that many of the European visitors want to see pristine white beaches with pure white sands, turquoise waters, nothing growing on it. And if there's anything in there, oh my God, the holiday is ruined. So the government policy until very recently has actually been to encourage resorts to remove their seagrasses so that they have these postcard white beaches.
Yeah.
So that has been a huge problem for the Maldives. As I mentioned before, seagrasses stabilise the sediment and control coastal erosion. Not a good scenario for the Maldives, which is about half a metre above sea level, to be removing the seagrasses that are protecting their islands from being eroded. So, we were able to set up a nationwide monitoring program. We ran a few workshops and a national conference where we had lots of government and university participants come in, as well as marine biologists from the various resorts came in as well, and teaching them about how to monitor seagrasses, the importance of seagrass, and how to restore seagrass in some cases as well. So the idea is that all of these participants now take that message out and are able to educate their visitors. And we've actually managed to get the government to remove that policy to remove seagrasses.
Oh, that's a huge step.
A huge step. It means that we've got resorts now actually forming a network to monitor and protect their seagrasses, which is really exciting stuff.
That's it is very. That's awesome. Is that getting I've lost my words here, but like that policy, is that also changing in other parts of the world as well? Like other countries seeing what the Maldives are doing and like, we want to apply that as well? I'm
not actually sure. I think there's not that many places that have an active policy to remove seagrasses. The Maldives is a particularly well-known one. I imagine there are parts of the Caribbean that would be in a similar sort of situation where, you've got European visitors who want to have pristine beaches. But I don't think it's a hugely widespread problem. Normally if you see a seagrass meadow, it's a lovely green meadow. You've got turtles swimming in it, loads of fish, all that sort of stuff. So the tourism benefits have become really apparent for the Maldives resorts that have been, advertising this to their tourists. So it's been very well received. So I don't think it's a particular problem. It's just a perception that they had to have pristine white beaches.
Right.
So, so that's the Maldives. Still sort of in touch with them. I'm not sure if I'll get to go back for another visit. It'd be nice if
surely, hopefully.
Staying at a 6-star resort was quite nice.
Well, if you need a podcaster and marine scientist as well to come along.
No worries. Me first. I've also been doing some work in Sri Lanka. So I've got some connections in Sri Lanka. So I'm co-supervising a master's student who's monitoring and surveying seagrass communities and looking at community perceptions about seagrasses in Sri Lanka. And I've also got a prospective PhD student. We're just trying to work out the logistics of it because he can't really study in Australia, unfortunately, which causes problems for family reasons and so on. There's quite a bit of interest in seagrasses in Sri Lanka. So it was actually the Sri Lankan government that nominated World Seagrass Day to the UN. And so we have World Seagrass Day the 1st of March every year. Yeah. And that's been going now. We've just had the second World Seagrass Day. The third World Seagrass Day, which was nominated by the Sri Lankan government. So
why?
They saw the value of seagrasses and they
do they have big meadows as well? Yeah,
they have some big meadows. Yeah, they've lost a few through coastal development and agriculture, that sort of thing. But they're concerned about it. They are monitoring it. They have UN monitoring sites and that sort of thing. So They're taking it quite seriously, and they've put in a lot of resources to support seagrass research, which is really quite exciting.
Yeah.
Mm.
Are seagrasses found worldwide? You said they were in Antarctica. Yeah.
Yeah, not in Antarctica.
Not. Where was
in the Arctic?
Oh, okay.
So Alaska, but not in Antarctica. They don't seem to be able to make it past the Southern Ocean.
Okay.
Which probably makes sense.
Yeah.
Marginal sort of conditions, and that current is just going to stop them from settling.
Yeah, and it could be dark area for a long period of time.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah. But yeah, otherwise worldwide. Yeah.
Right.
And
it's taken you everywhere.
It has taken me everywhere. Yeah. We have a biennial World Seagrass Workshop, International Seagrass Biology Workshop, which runs every 2 years. And yeah, it's hosted by researchers around the world. So that they've been all over the place, from the Mediterranean to Brazil to the States to Australia a couple of times.
Globally, are the seagrasses doing all right? And it's a very hard one to.
We are losing a lot of seagrass. We have a continuous loss of seagrass. We've lost about, I'm guessing, probably about 20% of the world's seagrasses in the last 100 years. Mainly through various.
When you say you lost 20%, is that numbers of species or area?
Area.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't. We've got one or two species that are endangered, and I guess they're all vulnerable locally because of our coastal impacts. But we haven't actually lost any species yet. At least we don't think we have. There are a couple that are rare, but it's the area that's being lost. So we have coastal pollution, eutrophication usually, so too many nutrients, and that wipes out an entire bay. So we're losing large areas of seagrass all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
You know how they have the comparison of saying it's like a football oval every minute or something in the Amazon?
Yeah.
Is it something like that as well?
It's something like that. I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but yeah, we're losing.
Right. That's not a good sign.
No.
If you had unlimited funding and time, what would be your dream project? What would you do?
What would I spend the money on? First off, we don't know all of the seagrass that we have around the world. And I think…
What do you mean by that? Not all the species?
We don't know where it is.
Oh,
and chances are there are some species that we haven't identified yet. Particularly in developing countries around the equator, it's difficult to get into those areas. They often have turbid waters, so it's very difficult to see below the surface. So you can't just fly over it and take photos and go, oh yeah, that's seagrass. You actually need to get in the water and actually actively survey those sites. So there's a lot we don't know about the seagrasses, particularly in the tropics, particularly in those developing countries. So I would spend a bit of money on that. We also need to better understand what the future adaptability of seagrasses is to climate change, and where our seagrass populations are going to go. Climate change is here. It's happening. We've already seen some changes. It's just going to get worse before it gets better. Even if we stop all carbon emissions now, we still have decades worth of global warming that's happening. So we need to prepare ourselves in terms of management, in terms of expectations, and in terms of protecting what we still have. And we need to spend some money on working out what's going to happen to these really important marine ecosystems going forward. We don't understand all the implications yet.
Hopefully it does happen. Hopefully there's some philanthropists out there.
Hopefully we'll have
and then
a lot of money to do this. The problem is it's a lot in developing countries, and so we need to build capacity in those places. We need to get boots on the ground and actually doing the work. And it's very difficult to get that message across when a lot of these countries are resource poor
Mm-hmm.
and they're spending any money they spend on marine resources is going to be about fishing and, sustainable survivability of their populations. That only makes sense. You've got to look after your people. If we can put the money in to get them to look after the environment, that will provide longer term protection for their marine food resources as well at the same time. I think the willpower is there. It's just they simply don't have the resources. So we need to put some money into those developing countries to educate, to help them do that basic monitoring and fact finding.
Well, it sounds like all the different work you're doing in different countries, it sounds like it's building. It's hopefully it's getting
it is
better.
building.
It's like slowly, but it's getting especially if resorts are making the initiatives like they are.
That was a big step. We were really quite excited to see that happening.
That definitely should be promoted more, and hopefully other places start taking the same.
Well, now that we have a World Seagrass Day, we're doing our bit to raise the profile of seagrasses.
Yeah.
Many places, seagrasses are completely subtidal. So, it's out of sight. Unless you actually swim and snorkel and dive, you won't even be aware that seagrasses are there until they wash up on the beach.
It's also not usually something that someone wants to swim over. Like I do a lot of diving.
Yeah.
Usually it's for a recreational things, but I don't go like swimming over seagrass, or people don't go to resorts or tours to go see seagrass.
Yeah.
Unless I think if they start understanding how cool and diverse and everything they are, then it may change as well. But usually they want to see big coral habitats or reef structures.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that we've noticed in the Maldives is that the marine biologists can take the tourists to the seagrass meadows and show them the diversity of fish and so much more fish, obviously in a seagrass meadow. But the turtles are coming in as well. So there's a good chance of seeing some turtles swimming past.
Dugongs, depending where you are in the world.
They haven't had any dugongs yet, but turtles.
Well, different parts of the world, it's meant.
Yeah.
But then also you got where everyone loves like the sea dragons or leafy pipefish and all that, which are incredibly hard to see. We catch so many of them in seagrass.
Yeah.
Never see them.
No, that's exactly right. There's a lot that you don't see. And what I tell my marine biology students is be the seagrass. Stick your head right down in the seagrass and look at what's going on down there, because there's so much actually going on inside the seagrass meadow. If you're swimming over the top of it, you don't really see all of that stuff that's going on. But underneath the canopy, there's so much going on.
Yeah.
So many fish hiding in there. And
so when we did that seagrass project, so I had a student, he was looking at the morphological traits and of like fish, and we were also catching crustaceans, or actually invertebrates, actually wasn't just crustaceans in there. The diversity and like all these fish that just looked so strange were the ones living in seagrass compared to what we were seeing on the reefs, but also all the invertebrates in there, like super colorful, crazy looking, weird, like they were all living in seagrass. It was like, as you said, probably the diversity was a lot higher in there than the reef. Like the diversity of morphological features, I should say, not maybe just diversity of like numbers of species, but the morphological features changes was unreal. Like you're seeing all these alien-like creatures living inside. It was
well, exactly. I mean, it's a very dense habitat. If you think about a seagrass meadow, it's loads and loads of leaves. So they've got to be able to get through those. And so I think morphologically they've probably adapted to that. And camouflage is an interesting thing. You get all sorts of different colors and so on, which you wouldn't expect, but they actually blend in really well with the seagrass, so you don't see the fish. Yeah,
exactly.
Until you catch them.
Do you have a least favorite seagrass species?
Oh, no, I don't have a least favorite seagrass. I probably have some favorite seagrasses.
Yeah. Well, like,
so the other end, least favorite. No,
can't name one out.
I can't call one out.
They're all. It's like, okay, for you, I guess.
There's a few that are less exciting than others.
Yeah. What are those ones? I'm putting you on the spot. What's your?
You are putting me on the spot. Probably the strap-like ones. They're just a strap-like leaf. They're just.
Is that like the Posidonias?
Yeah, Posidonias and Zosteras and all those. they all look pretty much the same.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
But there are some that are really quite different. So those are the ones that really.
So what's your favourite then? Or top two, top three?
Top two, top three. Let me think. Amphibolus.
Yeah, they are really cool.
Is really very cool.
Kind of like a palm tree.
Yeah, they're a funny sort of thing. Yeah. So they have these woody stems and then they have these bunches of leaves that come off them. So the bottom part of the stem is actually fairly bare. And then, up once they start getting up towards the light, you start getting these little clusters of leaves, which are very cool.
Yeah.
There's a halophila that's quite nice. So Halophila spinulosa looks a little bit like a fern frond. Which is very cool.
Yeah. Do we have them here?
Yeah, they occur down to probably Jurien, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Don't quite make it to Perth.
No, I don't think I've seen them.
Certainly find them up around Geraldton.
Okay.
Yeah. I've seen whole meadows of them up at Geraldton.
All right.
So, have to. Yeah, very cool.
Have a look out for them.
Yeah. And then there's a tropical one that I quite like, Inhalus acoroides. And that's a huge seagrass. It is a strap-leaf seagrass, but it's sort of intertidal. It doesn't grow any deeper than about 5 meters at the very most. And it has these really long leaves and very wide leaves. It's a big, chunky seagrass. And the leaves sort of grow up from the bottom and then sort of float on the surface. So they fold over and float on the surface. And so you end up with this sort of cave-like, or almost, like you're walking inside a forest.
Yeah.
They're not as dense as the Posidonias.
Yeah.
So you can actually swim between them, and you've got this shaded sort of canopy. It's absolutely amazing. Yeah, just very cool.
Yeah.
We get them in WA, but not really south of Broome, I think. So.
Oh, yeah, that's a long way up. Yeah. So how tall did you say they are?
They certainly grow up to 2-3 meters in length. The leaves. Yeah.
I've learned so much.
The biggest seagrass in the world is about 7 meters in length. Has a leaf that's 7 meters in length.
Really?
It's a type of Zostra. Grows up in Korea.
Big long strap one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Up around Korea, Japan.
Do they have the biggest dugongs as well? Or?
No, it's more a cold water.
Yeah.
Seagrass. So
right, 7 meters. That's huge.
There actually used to be a dugong that used to live in the Arctic that went extinct.
Really?
So got hunted to extinction back in the 1800s.
Sad.
Yeah,
that's a sad note.
Yeah.
Right, but 7 meters long.
7 meter long seagrass.
That's insane. Yeah, it's like
huge.
a giant kelp forest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely massive.
Wow.
I haven't seen them myself, but
surely that's one of the
friends
bucket lists.
who work in them. So yeah.
Is that a bucket list?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Wow, I had no idea. Mike, this has been amazing. I've learned so much.
Awesome.
Considering I've been into a lot of your lectures over the years, I'm still learning more.
See, there's always more.
There's always more. I'm sure this is probably one of the longest podcasts, and there's still so much more to. No. Sorry, this has been amazing. I want to keep going, but this has been incredible. Thank you. You're a wealth of knowledge.
Absolute pleasure.
Hence where you've made it in the world and in your life. So thank you so much.
An absolute pleasure, Kurt.
Paramount importance.